Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Rosemary Rung. I'm chair of the HB 737 Commission. I'm going to call this meeting to order. We do have Senator Gary Daniels on the phone. Is anybody else on the phone? Okay, so we have a quorum. So the first order of business is approval of the April minutes. I want to thank Ron Dunn for taking those minutes. And today's meeting will be, we've kind of made a cycle. So Nancy Murphy will be taking the minutes today. And I know she has to leave in a little bit. So when she leaves, I'll just finish from the recording. Okay, so do I have a motion on the April minutes? Moved by Laureen Allen. Is there a second? Second by Ron Dunn. Are there any corrections, additions to the minutes? Mr. Wimsatt?
Yeah, I looked at them a little while back and I don't remember. It made reference to I think what was intended to be the communications subcommittee, and it called it like commission subcommittee or something like that. So I think it's just a typo that needs to be fixed.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Mesmer?
I don't see, maybe I missed it, so I apologize if I did. Was there an update from DES that they were providing for this last meeting? I thought we were going to see a written update from DES summary.
Mr. Wimsatt, I don't recall. Did you send your written notes to Mr. Dunn or myself?
Yeah, I did that, I think, on the same day of the meeting.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'll double check to make sure those are included, and I'll just have them inserted verbatim.
I think they are in the minutes that I reviewed.
Oh, okay.
It should be.
So I had a question. I had asked for the offsite, outside the CD area estimate on wells that were contaminated to be included in that. So I don't see that here.
I'm not sure that I provided that. I can certainly get that information together for this month's minutes.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. So with the correction of the communications committee, all those in favor of the minutes as amended, so signify by saying, oh, Mr. Dunn, did you have a question?
Oh, just a,
Nope. Voting. Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand. Senator Daniels?
Aye.
Okay. The minutes pass as amended. I'd like to turn the meeting over to Representative Mooney for an update on legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members. We have 4 bills that have had a high level of excitement in the process just recently. So the bills I'm going to highlight this legislative update are House Bill 478, House Bill 1547, House Bill 1546, and House Bill 1185. So I'm going to start first with House Bill 478. You may recall that was the bill that would extend Saint-Gobain paying for filters and operation and maintenance in wells 4 and 5 beyond the year 2025. That bill, just as a refresher, passed through the House. It did have its hearing in the Senate, and the ultimate decision in the Senate was interim study. So that bill has an interim study recommendation. And correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Daniels, but I believe by the fall, as it is in the House, a recommendation has to be given on the bill, whether or not it's recommended for future legislation or not. So more to come on that. Interim study is really not the end of the line, as some may think, but that was the ultimate decision made by the Senate on House Bill 478. Okay, House Bill 1547. That bill, you may recall, was my soil bill with some extraordinary co-sponsors here on the line as well. And including Representative Rung and Senator Daniels. The bill we worked on very closely with DES and also originated from activists here in Merrimack. And the bill originally was to set standards on soil. It was amended in the House in order to allow a study by the USGC to take place due this fall, and then let the commissioner of DES make those recommendations on soil. So that bill, is a refresher, passed through the House, no problem. That bill also passed through the Senate, no problem. However, the Senate put on an amendment to the bill. And as a summary of the amendment, it's rather large. So we're happy about that. What the amendment does is it amends the PFAS Remediation Loan Fund grants section just slightly. It also allows DES to establish rebate programs to assist impacted private well users with water treatment or connection to public water systems. And here's the big part, it adds $25 million to the PFAS Remediation Loan Fund. This amendment passed through the full Senate. The House has requested a committee of conference that has yet to be determined, the date and the time.
That's going to be
it's
Monday morning at 9 o'clock.
Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you. That's straightens things out. Incidentally, Senator Daniels, on the home page, it's mentioned that the committee of conference is going to take place on the 15th, which is this Sunday. So if you could just mention that to somebody in your staff to take a look into that. It is on the website, but good to know it's this Monday. So getting back to this committee of conference, several have asked me who are on the committee of conference, what's the committee of conference all about? And what I know is that through others, I'm told, that the House Finance Chairman wants to know where the money's coming from. So that's all I know. But I'm not anticipating any issue with regards to that. Again, it's a very friendly amendment, and that's what I know. So more on that to come. All right, moving on, House Bill 1546. This was Representative Boyd's bill related to air emissions. The Senate did make an amendment to it. It did pass through the House. The Senate now has made an amendment to it, which was concurred in the House yesterday. And the amendment would put the authority in the commissioner of DES and also rely on existing definitions of PFAS as opposed to altering any. So House Bill 1546 should be well on its way to the governor's desk after yesterday's concurrence in the House. And then that leads to House Bill 1185, Representative Rung's bill that went through a little bit of drama, to say the least, in getting through. There was a mix-up on an amendment, which I know she'll want to expound on, that was cleared up. And that bill and its amendment from the Senate side was concurred on by the House. So it's well on its way, despite some very serious bumps in between. So Representative Rung, if you just want to give a description there, since you know it best, of your ordeal.
It aged me, Representative Mooney, because during the public hearing at the House members had a concern about the inclusion of residential waste. And this is a bill that is enabling legislation that would allow municipalities to regulate PFAS coming into their wastewater treatment plants. And they could fine people, and they could keep the fines if that was what they wanted to do. So during the public hearing, I got an amendment to exclude residential waste, only keeping septage that's coming in from commercial industrial sources, plus anyone on a sewer system. And but prior to that, I did have another amendment that I brought to the public hearing, which corrected some clerical mistakes that were in the original bill. So when I handed out that amendment, it was superseded by the amendment that was requested by the committee members. They were very happy with the new amendment. They passed it, and then it went on the House consent calendar. That passed. Now it goes to the Senate, and I attend the public hearing. Everything seems to go smoothly. And then I learned the following week that the committee had voted to ITL it. And I really didn't understand why. And I reached out to the senators, about how this bill is important and what issues did they have. And Senator Waters and Senator Daniels came back with some questions. And I realized from the questions they were asking that they didn't have the bill as it passed the House. And I went back and did some research, and it turned out that the amendment that excluded residential waste, that amendment number was not included in the committee file, in the bill file. The old amendment, just the clerical one, was included. So it created, thank goodness Senator Daniels and Senator Waters, especially Senator Daniels' email, because up until that point, I had no indication that they weren't looking at the bill as the committee passed. So thankfully, the Senate overturned the ITL on the floor. They introduced a floor amendment. I think Senator Avar did that, which is actually the bill as we thought we passed in the House. And but since it was a change from the official House bill, it had to be concurred, and which it did. So that's on its way to the governor. So all's well that ends well. But there's a lesson here. Don't assume that a bill that's on consent, that's amended, I'm always going to be checking that amendment number to make sure it's the correct one. Sorry for the long speech on that. But thank you very much, Representative Mooney. Senator Daniels, do you know who is on that committee of conference?
Yes, give me a minute.
Okay, that's all right. It might be worthwhile for us to, recommend our colleagues.
Which committee of conference you talking about?
It's for 1547.
I have it. I have it in front of me. It's Senators Daniels, Bradley, and Waters.
Okay. Do you know who the representatives are on that?
Yes, on 1547, they are Representatives Pearl, Aaron, Bixby, and Emmerich.
Okay. I'll reach out to those in my caucus to, make sure that they understand the bill, and we are ready to concur, right? It's really just the funding piece, correct? Okay. All right. Look, does anyone have any questions for Representative Mooney? Ms. Mesmer?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the well rebate program, and maybe perhaps you or Mr. Wimsatt can confirm this, but it's my understanding that you don't qualify for a rebate unless your water exceeds the state standards. Is that correct? Oh, sorry, Mr. Wimsatt, were you going to comment?
Yeah, you can finish your question though. I'm happy to wait.
Oh, well, if that's the case, I just wanted to put a bug in people's ears that it's important to ensure that we're being proactive in the state of New Hampshire on PFAS MCLs. I'd like to see some legislation come in that maybe puts a buffer on that qualification, because, if you have someone who's vulnerable in your household and your PFAS levels don't exceed the state standards as they currently stand, you may still be concerned about the effects of that. For instance, myself, I have 26 parts per trillion total PFAS in my own town water, and I'm concerned about any PFAS in my water. So we, at our own expense, put our own system in to deal with that, our own point of entry system. And I think there's probably many other people. So as we are cognizant of the fact that the regulations lag health studies and for a great length of time, we might want to look at some adjustments to standards for the fall.
Sure, thanks for the question. Yeah, and you're correct. The rebate program, which has not been officially launched yet, but once it's launched, we expect that the eligibility criteria will require that you have an analysis that shows that your well is over the standard. And that's a pretty standard approach to any kind of assistance program. That the standards have to mean something, right? So we usually generally would use those as a basis and a criterion for being eligible for the rebate program.
Okay, and I'll address this also later to Ms. Mesmer. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, Dr. Woods.
Yeah, I have had another piece of legislation that I'd like to sort of mention if at the appropriate time.
Yeah, I'm going to actually, when we get to subcommittee reports, I'm going to be talking about the policy subcommittee and, the next steps for the next few months. Okay, any other questions of yes, Ms. Allen.
There we go. The settings are different in this.
Yeah.
When we talk about the air bill, I just want people to keep in mind for the fall and moving forward, the amendment, when we talk about only the existing definition of PFAS, Rosemary, maybe in the policy group, you can include this discussion because you have a background in chemistry. I don't want to get into the chemistry. It's just too complex. But there's a lot of national tension about this definition of PFAS between scientists, environmentalists, academics, and even the EPA. And what's troublesome is if we follow, and we have to follow, and the representation that we have, I encourage you to really start following what the EPA is doing and where they're going here in the terms of definition. In other nations, they're defining PFAS differently than we are. Industry, we know, has a huge seat at the table in the US of A. That's just the way it is. But the troubling thing for here in Saint-Gobain is if we look at their practice of PTFE is Teflon, the polyfluoromers are at this point really being overlooked. The federal government is not challenging that from industry right now. So it is going to be up to the states to protect ourselves. And this is not just a big environmental woo-woo issue. This is absolutely pertinent to here because we have this active industry presence, and what they've pivoted to and what they use and continue to use is in a category that at this point is exempt from a lot of the reporting, and it's exempt from the definition of PFAS as we know it. Many of their production lines, that does not mean it's safer, it does not mean we're okay, and that doesn't mean the pollution stopped. It means that industry is pretty powerful and has deep pockets. They're a step ahead. So I really encourage the policy group and anybody in this group, legislators and stuff, over the summer, if we want to do some work about getting into the weeds over where this information is, it's there. It's very clear, it's very doable, but you have to delve in and get together with people and find that information. And it's very troubling when you educate yourself on this matter. So I just want to put that little plug in there for we really need to look at that because the amendments, I understand why some of the amendments are made. I was involved in some of the processes, but in the air bill in particular, it always intrigues me where these asks come from amendments and why. So we really have to pay attention to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, I'd like to turn Senator Daniels, do you have any questions? I don't want to forget that you're here too.
No, not at this time.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Wimsatt, would you like to provide an update from DES?
Sure, happy to. Good morning, everyone. So I have my usual update today, but I usually include some material information from the Air Division, but actually Cathy Beahm is here with us today from our Air Division, and so she's going to provide the Air Resources Division's portion of the update. So I'll start with mine, and then I will turn it over to Cathy. And thanks to Cathy for being here. She's actually trying to do her vacation this week, but it isn't working out very well. So we really appreciate her being here for us today. So on April 8th, so we have a fair amount of news here. On April 18th, we announced that we had reached an agreement, that DES and the state had reached an agreement with Saint-Gobain for the provision of alternate water for homes located within the 2018 consent decree boundary. And there were specific remedies listed for specific properties for about 353 in that agreement. And they included in Bedford, south of County Road and east of Liberty Hill Road, where there were water line connections outlined for 15 properties and point of entry treatment systems for 181 properties. In Litchfield, in the Hillcrest Road area, there were water line connections to 77 properties. And in Merrimack, in the Wildcat Falls area in Brenda Lane, there were water line connections to 32 properties. And then in other areas of the towns of Bedford, Merrimack, Litchfield, and Londonderry, there were an assortment of water line connections to 48 properties. So that describes the 353 properties that were outlined in the agreement. There was a requirement in the agreement for an additional roughly 650 properties for those for remedies, either water lines or POETs, to be specified for those properties. At the time the agreement was entered into, we didn't have that reconciled, so it gave Saint-Gobain a deadline of April 30th to submit proposed remedies for those additional 650 properties. They met that deadline late on the 29th. They gave us that list. That is currently being reviewed. It's through the attorneys, so it's not something that I'm ready to share, but we're hoping to get that reconciled if we have any issues with it promptly. And so I would expect that certainly by our next meeting, I'll be able to outline the specifics of that. But so that's good news. It means that there is now a proposal for a remedy for any property owners inside the consent decree boundary that have been offered bottled water by Saint-Gobain to have a permanent safe alternate water solution, either in the form of a water line connection or a treatment system. It's an important milestone in the project. It's by no means the end of it. We still have a lot of work yet to do, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to let folks know we did host on the evening of Wednesday, May 4th, a virtual public meeting to discuss the agreement, and that included a brief review of the site history, a summary of the provisions of the agreement, and then I think probably about 2.5 hours of a question and answer period where we fielded questions from the participants. And I believe there were somewhere on the order of 200 participants in that meeting. So I think it was a pretty successful meeting. We were able to get the word out to folks and get their questions answered as best we could. So on April 28th, we issued a comment letter on the supplemental site investigation report. And that letter requested that Saint-Gobain submit an application in 120 days for a groundwater management permit for the site. And that permit, for those who don't know, in our rules, we have a requirement that a party who has contaminated groundwater needs to get a groundwater management permit, which essentially sets out the parameters of a monitoring program and it has to establish what we call a groundwater management zone, which is defined as the area where groundwater is contaminated above standards. So we've asked that they submit within 120 days an application for that permit. We also, the same letter requested a submittal of a remedial action plan for the facility and adjacent properties within 120 days of receipt of the analytical data from the upcoming stormwater sampling. So that request, the remedial action plan, again, is a requirement in our rules. Once you've completed your site investigation or substantially completed your site investigation, there's an expectation that you will submit a remedial action plan. And of course, this plan for this site will include not only a proposal to address what we call on-site contamination on the site proper, but also the remedy for the wells drinking water wells that are impacted. So we're down the road on that. We still have work to do and still have more data that we need to get from them, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So on April 29th, we received a proposal from Saint-Gobain, or I'm sorry, I just talked about that. That's the 600 properties. On May 4th, we issued a comment letter pertaining to Addendum 14, and that, of course, was the latest addendum to the drinking water sampling plan. That required, the comment letter that we sent required Saint-Gobain to include all the properties in what we call the buffered areas around potential contamination sources. So we've talked in this meeting before about Saint-Gobain has essentially drawn fixed distance buffers around a number of potential other source areas for PFAS contamination, such as fire stations or other sites where they believe there may be contamination that's not associated with their emissions. And they've not, to date, they have not been willing to sample around those, in those buffered areas. So our letter that we sent on May 4th made it clear that we think they do need to sample those, and we want them to submit a plan by June 3rd for sampling in those areas. And also, there are a couple hundred properties where not in the buffered areas, but who just simply haven't been offered sampling because they haven't fallen within the iterative process where Saint-Gobain draws a 500-foot circle around any exceedances and then offers people inside that circle an opportunity to sample. And it's our position that really all the properties inside the CD area are at a meaningful risk of being contaminated from their emissions, and so they should all be sampled. So they are required to respond to us by June 3rd to our request to include all those properties in their next addendum. So we'll look forward to getting that response. And I think that probably describes most of the activity we've had by way of letters and communications. On to the water supply well sampling statistics. Again, they did present their work plan for residential well sampling plus 14 addenda. That's where we're up to right now. And as of April 19th, the compilation, there are 3,691 properties that have been identified for sampling, and that's the same as the previous report. And then 3,591 that were sent access agreements, and the return rate on that has been about 68%. And so again, that's the same as the April report. There are 2,221 samples that have been collected by their consultants so far from water supply wells, and that's 29 more than the April report that we provided. And then there are 975 properties to date that have been offered bottled water, and that's 11 more than the April report. And of course, as you've seen over time, those numbers change mostly each month. They're doing additional sampling pursuant to Addendum 14 right now, and presumably we'll do additional sampling pursuant to the next addendum. So those numbers will keep changing, but those are as of the 19th of April, that's what the numbers look like. And then as far as their site investigation goes, we do still need them to conduct stormwater sampling, and the timing of that will be dependent upon rain events and safety concerns along the Merrimack River, but we expect that to happen soon. And then again, as I mentioned before, the remedial action plan is due to DES 120 days after Saint-Gobain's consultant receives the analytical results from the stormwater sampling. And that's my update. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but also to turn it over to Cathy for an update on the air resources issues.
Okay, before we move on to Ms. Beahm, Ms. Murphy, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just wondering if on that virtual meeting, I think it was the May 4th one, just wondering, because I know a couple of people that were on that call raised the issue about the challenges getting water. Do you know, Mr. Wimsatt, what the follow-up has been? I know it seems to be up and down, but people are suggesting it's a really long time to get their water. So just wondering what actions DES has taken with Saint-Gobain around that.
Yeah, this is
and one more thing, and then I won't interrupt. And can I just make sure that I get the notes so I can include them in the meeting notes later?
Well, of course.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as to your first question, we do communicate every weekly, sometimes daily with Saint-Gobain regarding concerns about bottled water delivery. It continues to be an area of concern. The vendor has been very challenged to be timely with their deliveries, and it's something we've expressed concern with Saint-Gobain. What we have what ends up happening, it's not a great solution, but when we get someone saying, hey, I've been waiting for water, I'm running out of water, in many cases, Saint-Gobain will actually have Golder, their consultant, go out and purchase water and bring water to them that day. So that has been happening. That's not to say everybody's getting their water deliveries when they want them, and this is an area of continued concern. I think a lot of this is related to the vendors, Monadnock's ability to keep truck drivers going and keep up with all the customers. It's not a great situation. The good news is if we get these permanent solutions in place, the problems with that will be temporary, because we'll no longer have people getting delivered bottled water. Instead, they'll either have a water line connection or a point of entry treatment system installed.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Yes, Mr. Dunn.
I just want to follow up on what Nancy just said. So Mike, at what point should somebody contact Golder? Because I'll just use my own personal experience. I ordered water myself. I've been probably 3 weeks waiting right now, probably 4 weeks. As soon as I get my water, I call up and I order my next delivery. So at what point should I be telling people that are asking me to call?
Your audio just broke, Mr. Ron.
I'm sorry. I just wondered, how long should they be waiting to call you?
Well, I think what I would encourage is if you have requested a water delivery and you're not getting it timely and you are concerned that you're going to run out, you can call Saint-Gobain directly. I don't think they have anyone calling Golder directly, but you can call Saint-Gobain. If you don't get a response promptly, you can call Jeff Martz, and in many cases, when this has happened, Jeff has then immediately reached out to Saint-Gobain, and then they get to Golder, and then a delivery gets made. It's obviously not an efficient or desirable way to have this done, but that's what ends up happening in some cases.
Just some people that don't have a lot of storage space are getting frustrated.
I'm sure, no, we're very aware there's a lot of frustration.
Thank you.
Any other? Yes, Ms. Mesmer.
Mike, did I miss your total of the wells located outside the CD area that are impacted?
No, I didn't provide it. I will get that number and I will provide that to Nancy with my minutes or with my written update, and I can CC you as well, so you have that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Allen?
The 353 in agreement, Mike, 181 are poets. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think right. That's just for the first 350 that were identified. That's correct.
We don't know how many of the next 650 have poets. I mean, you do probably, but you can't share that. Could you just give us a sense of why such a high number in poets? Because I think that would cut costs down dramatically to Saint-Gobain, but I'm kind of bothered by that as a permanent solution. And people expressed concerns, a couple of people on the May 4th call, about if they test at 12 or below for PFOA, all of a sudden, hey, they don't have to be maintained by Saint-Gobain in the future. So, my ideal would be that everybody should be hooked up so they can be professionally, remediated and professionally maintained. I'm just bothered about those poets. What's the reason for so many of them? Because that's like half, more than
Sure.
half.
I understand, and that's a difficult area. Under our rules, there are a number of criteria to use to decide on what is an appropriate remedy, and in some cases, or part of those criteria include cost effectiveness. We are actually, it's an area where we get mixed signals from, or not mixed signals, but we get different opinions from different people, right? So there are some people who very much want to be connected to a water line, and that's their only solution that they would be happy with. And other people who very vociferously say they don't want a water line, they don't want a water bill, they want a point of entry treatment system that's fully paid for by the company. So we have people in both camps. At the end of the day, the proposals for the poets are presumably based on an evaluation of relative cost. We know that both of those can be an acceptable solution under the rules, so it is a solution that can be proposed. We're also aware that there are some towns that maybe town government really wants to see significant expansion of water service in their towns. And we're reaching out to those towns to if there may be an opportunity here, and we're willing to entertain it, and certainly and facilitate it. But if towns want to be partners in expanding water and in lieu of poets to a larger area, and they, basically, obviously, Saint-Gobain has a financial responsibility to provide a solution here, and to the extent that there's a desire to negotiate with them and look at other additional funding opportunities to expand water, it may be possible to cobble together a plan in an individual town or in individual portions of towns to opt for instead putting in water line expansion as opposed to poets. But I think that's something that is, as long, and again, we're still looking at their proposals with respect to the 650. As long as the proposals that they make for poets are acceptable, then they're going to be acceptable. And if there's a different desire in the community, then it's probably going to take a combination of townspeople and town government and Saint-Gobain with DES participating to try to look at potentially opting for a different solution that might include a water line expansion in lieu of poets.
So it sounds like that the town may have an opportunity and residents have made an opportunity to weigh in. So it isn't 100% done deal. I like hearing that. That's what you're saying. Because people don't get a say before the agreement is made because that's just the way it goes. But it sounds like if people speak up and say, hey, we would like maybe to expand water lines, if the town and municipality agrees, the state can also use some of the federal infrastructure dollars for that also, right?
Right, we're prepared absolutely to participate in those discussions. I don't want to conflate that with that, us using authority under the law to compel Saint-Gobain to do that, because that's not the same thing. But I think that, certainly we're very much interested. Our view all along has been that for a lot of reasons, we believe that connection to a public water supply is the superior solution. And whenever we can make that happen, we're interested in helping to do that. But it doesn't always mean that we can require that.
Ms. Murphy?
Oh, thank you. Just a couple of questions for Mr. Wimsatt. When you said that cost effectiveness is a consideration, cost effectiveness to whom? To Saint-Gobain or to the impacted well owners? That was my first question. I mean, whose cost are we worried about? Is DES worried about the cost of Saint-Gobain, or is it to the private well owners? And the second question is, when you talk about being DES reaching out potentially to towns and being parties, if Saint-Gobain is the polluter, why and the community impacted well owners want the connection to public water, why would the town then be responsible? Why is Saint-Gobain not being responsible for that, especially as connection to public water supply is the we know the better option?
Well, again, to the extent, at some level, there's more than one option available to a responsible party for providing safe alternate water. The two main options are connection to a water system or installment of a point of entry treatment system. So that is a viable option under the rules. And the reason I say the town would need to get involved is because in order, let's say in the abstract here, if a responsible party proposes to provide poets as a solution and it's approvable under the rules, then they would have, if they do that, they would have satisfied the requirement under the rules. If townspeople or town government wants to instead work towards expanding water supply, that's outside of a regulatory activity. That's a discussion that can happen. And again, it would take monies other than just Saint-Gobain's money. It would take public monies that are available, potentially money from the town or money from the federal government, wherever. There are a lot of sources for expanding water supply and addressing contamination right now. So there are a lot of opportunities that we've really unprecedented opportunities that we've never had before. So what I was trying to say is if the towns want to pursue that, that's something we're certainly interested in participating with them and with Saint-Gobain to try to develop a cobbled together funding solution that would still hold St. Cobain responsible for a fair share of the cost, but would probably also take additional funds.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Mr. Wimsatt? I have a couple. Mr. Wimsatt, the letters that you cited between, that you sent to St. Cobain and their response, are those available on One Stop?
Yeah, and actually, I'll put links into my written notes that I give to Nancy, so that anybody who reads them can look at those.
Okay, that would be very helpful. And that's it for right now. Oh, one other thing, and I'm sure this is an experience shared by other people in the towns, is we get calls, and I send some of them your way from people. I think it would be more efficient if we could access a database or a spreadsheet of all these people who've had wells contaminated, if they're inside or outside the CD. Because some of these answers, I think we could answer ourselves without having to forward them to you. Is it possible, or is that data on One Stop where we can access an up-to-date listing of affected homes?
I will check with Jeff to see what data in its, like an Excel spreadsheet is available on One Stop. I mean, this is an area that's difficult for us because we also want to be respectful of people's privacy, and making broadly available their specific data and their specific address and their names is something we try to avoid doing. It's a difficult area. Obviously, people want to know as much as they can possibly know until it's about them, and then they don't want their information to be known to everyone else. So it's a hard area, but I'll touch base with Jeff and figure out what that might be.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mesmer?
I just want to follow up on that. So all the data is available on the PFAS GIS map. So you can click on that and see the results. If you want to go through by hand, all of the analytical reports, I believe, at least for inside the CD area, are on One Stop as well. So it's very arduous, of course, but it's all there. Their name, the letters sent to them, and their PFAS levels. So it's all public information in piecemeal, which I'm sure DES has in some other form that uploads it to the map, but it is available publicly. It's just that it's not in a user-friendly fashion.
Right. Well, and it's good. I'm glad you raised that, Mindy, because if you look on the map, you can go down in and you can take a look, and if you want to do a little homework, you can kind of figure out where things are. But we've purposely not made it so that you can just scroll in and say, this is John Smith's house at 10, Rayburn Drive, and these are his numbers. That we purposely not made it easy to do that because we're trying to be in the interest in realizing we're collecting data and we have a responsibility to make that data available to the public. We're also trying to balance that with being respectful of people's privacy. So it's a very difficult issue for us.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Ms. Beahm, guess what? You're up, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you to the commission. It's been a few months since I've been here, so I thought perhaps I'd do a quick, sort of a chronology of events to put us all on the same page. So I was asked last month to comment or at least give an update on the bypass operations and inspections that DES does to ensure compliance. And I really have to just mention that because it's an enforcement case, there's a limit to how much I can get into for details, but I can sort of give you an overview. So as most of you know, the control device that St. Cobain installed started operating last July. And they were required under their permit to do an air stack test to verify its operation. And that was done in September. In September, while we were there, we noticed that a bypass stack that had been installed, it's a typical emergency type situation that is there for protection of workers and the control equipment and the process. But we issued a letter of deficiency in November because it wasn't addressed in their permit and the impacts weren't evaluated. during the original permitting process. So that LOD requested, among other things, the frequency that it was used, the purpose for it, a monitoring plan from St. Gobain regarding both monitoring of the RTO, which is the control device, and monitoring of how often they use the bypass and under what scenarios, and monitoring maintenance, all those types of aspects. And then an application to amend the permit, the temporary permit that they're currently operating under for the RTO. So they submitted all of that information back in December when it was due. And what we ended up doing is going out, both a high level senior compliance inspector and myself went out in January to do an inspection at the facility. And the purpose was really to verify the records that were kept on site, the operating conditions of both the RTO and the bypass, the supporting documentation, so to speak, for the reports that came in for the letter deficiency. We also, under the review of the application itself, requested a more robust monitoring plan. The RTO plan that was submitted was really just about the RTO because that was from the vendor, but the bypass and the header bringing all of the emissions to the RTO were constructed by St. Gobain. So it was requested that the monitoring plan address both sides of that. So they submitted the monitoring plan. They submitted additional records to support the report that they'd submitted for the LOD, records that we requested after the inspection in January. We've been reviewing all of that. We also received, so in April, we requested an update to the records. So we requested all of the same information we requested at the inspection in January, and they submitted that. And it appears that those records are reflective of the new monitoring plan that they submitted, but that's more robust. So at this point, we're preparing a draft permit based on the information, the application, the monitoring, the records. We believe we have sufficient information to begin that process of drafting a permit that would address the operation of the bypass. We've also, on May 6th, issued a final approval letter, which I just realized is not up on One Stop, but will be, approving the stack test from last September and the results from it. Just so the commissioner is aware, the stack test was conducted using a method that EPA came out with about a year or two ago. It required sampling for an analysis of 50 PFAS compounds, both going into the RTO and out of the RTO. The results of the compliance test that St. Gobain and their contractor BAR conducted showed that they have, of the 50 PFAS compounds going to the RTO, they're about 17 pounds a year of emissions, and coming out of the control device, they're around 2 pounds per year of all of the 50 compounds. They're also able to demonstrate that they are in compliance with their permit condition for PFOA and PFOS for the pounds per year limits that are in their permit. And we're intending to include 2 more PFAS compounds and their limitations in the revised permit because the AGQSs became effective between the time that the permit was issued and today. And they're able to show compliance with those compounds as well, given the stack test results. What else? The stack test also looked at hydrogen fluoride coming from the RTO, and its levels are not high enough to require a control device for hydrogen fluoride. In fact, they're very low, and they support both the initial analysis during the permitting process as well as the material balance that St. Gobain was required to do. So that's three ways that they've identified hydrogen fluoride emissions and able to demonstrate compliance with our state air toxics rule. So the next step is I'm working on drafting the permit. We will be providing a public comment period. That's a typical next step in the permitting process. We'll be scheduling a hearing because I anticipate interest in a public hearing on the topic, but I don't have a given date for that. That's just the next steps. I think that pretty much covers my update, but I'd be happy to take questions.
Okay, does anyone have, Ms. Allen?
You have 2 additional compounds you said that they're going to look at. What are those 2 additional?
So as you know, the AGQS for PFOA and PFOS was reduced when the House bill, and I can't remember the actual name of it, but anyway, we got the 4 PFAS compounds that have ambient groundwater quality standards. So it's PFOA, PFOS, PFNA, and PFHXS. So the limitations in the permit in pounds per year post-control will be reflective of those. And actually, the way that those limits in the permit are established is not based on the actual AGQS. It's actually based on the detection level for water testing. So the intent is that the control device emits at a level that you wouldn't be able to detect it after deposition onto the ground based on detection levels of water standards and methods. So.
Okay, I think I misunderstood. I thought when I heard 2 additional, that was in addition to the 4. So, I mean, it's good that they're reducing, but they're not eliminating. My concern is, you know, when we look at North Carolina, you know, when they looked at 99.5% recapture and a very low release to the environment, all of their contamination continues to build based on what we would consider a reduced release. Could I also ask you about the rainwater samples? I noticed in March that the numbers went up, and clearly the concern of citizens who are reading this is the on-site numbers are higher than, you know, Nashua and Concord, and that makes sense. And here's something that the legislators need to pay attention to also when we look forward to the next session is PFBA, PFHXA, PFPEA, and the 6.2 FTSA are significantly higher than the rest of the compounds on the list in the rainwater samples. So that speaks to me as to, you know, what's being utilized or what it breaks down into. And rainwater to me is directly related to air quality. And those are of grave concern because PFBA and PFHXA in particular, and PFPAA is starting to have some research. We're seeing some ties, you know, to inhalation and lung health and various conditions that people can be impacted by. So I think, you know, we, as a health commission, we have to pay attention to what this means, you know, to the environment and people. So can you speak at all about that rainwater sample and why, any ideas why it went up so much in March? Because those 4 compounds are consistently right higher than the rest of them. That's been a regular finding in every report. So we still have environmental impact and exposure.
Right. So let me take a couple of your questions, see if I can do with my memory here. With regards to the North Carolina facility, they were looking at 99.99% destruction, but they only looked at 5 compounds. They weren't looking at all 50. So I want to clarify that. And their post emissions are higher than our inlet emissions. So again, the manufacturer, Saint-Gobain as an end user, kind of, so I just put it in perspective. You're correct. Most of the stack test results and the rainwater study results show the shorter chain compounds as being the higher levels. And yes, in March, the rainwater results were higher for some of those compounds that hadn't been detected in previous rainwater monthly studies. So just to make everyone understand that the consent decree that was issued because of Saint-Gobain's failure to install the control device on time required that they do a monthly rainwater analysis, and they do it on property and then in Concord and Nashua to try to get an idea of, you know, is it across the state or just locally. They've been reporting on a monthly basis, and in some months there's no detections whatsoever, and in other months there have been detections. The March one, we're working with our meteorologists and senior scientists to do something called backed trajectories, trying to look at where that rain came from and what it was doing at the time. We just started doing that last week before I went on vacation, so I need to get back to that. But I did recognize that the numbers have changed a little bit. The entire year-long study, Saint-Gobain is required to do a final report, and I think that's June or July is when that ends. But in the meantime, we're doing our own analysis. I don't really think I can comment too much at this point on it because, again, I just got those results and have been looking at them recently. So I think that covers it. I don't know.
So is it fair to say that we're regulating what we call legacy compounds, but what we're seeing potentially increasing, but at higher levels than legacy compounds, which we regulate, that's what we're seeing in the environment? You know, that's my point mostly to the folks who are dealing in Concord here and who are looking at how to regulate and how to legislate moving forward. You know, what we see increasing is the shorter chain, but we're regulating only for the longer chain. Is that a fair assessment for me to make that?
Well, what I can say is that the thermal oxidizer, it really is operating mechanically and chemically and, you know, scientifically, regardless of the standards that are set. So it's going to break down carbon fluoride chains, whether there's a regulated AGQS for it or not. And if you look at the inlet versus the outlet, it is destroying many of those, not 100% destruction, but it is reducing emissions, not just of the 4 compounds that have an AGQS. So I will say that. And again, you know, nothing does 100%, you know, control. So there will still be some level of emissions, but the intent is that post-control does not cause or contribute to an AGQS violation. So yes, for that, there are limits based on those 4 compounds. But overall, the control device itself is controlling regardless of the standards.
Dr. Woods?
Here, sorry. I had myself on mute. Thank you. Again, just a side question, perhaps. From what I gather from the discussion that Lori and Cathy just had, the air and rainwater accumulation is the endpoint, you know, say a model, is the endpoint of that material, because it could accumulate just in if you're modeling it. Although it's lower on each test, by the time it settles on the ground, it could accumulate to a point that it reaches above the threshold. Is the model that you're using the endpoint of that model for that accumulation part, the groundwater testing? I'm trying to see, you know, because they will accumulate. And so taking that into effect, how is that handled?
Thank you for your question. So the model that we're using to predict how much is going to deposit on the ground is an air model. It looks at 5 years worth of meteorological conditions, and it looks at the emission rates that are coming from the facility based on the stack test, and it predicts how much is going to land on the ground. What the analysis that took that to detection levels in water is less of a model and more of just a direct calculation. So if you've got so many grams of a particular compound landing in a square meter, and you have so much rainwater that infiltrates the ground in Merrimack, that becomes a concentration, and that's compared to the detection level of a water test concentration. I recognize that there would be some accumulation. Again, I'm not going to an AGQS level of 12 parts per trillion. I'm looking at detection levels at all. So I'm trying to put that buffer in there for that. And again, this is based off from the current law that says they have to put on controls, and after controls, they can't cause or contribute.
Yeah. So the models could still be refined, shall we say. Thank you.
Ms. Murphy?
Thank you, Ms. Beahm. I just have a question. You had mentioned that the HF is not high enough to require the control device. How is that monitored? And what's the criteria? At what point does that become a requirement?
Right.
Thank you.
So there were 3 different ways that they predicted what their hydrogen fluoride emissions would be. Before it was built, they did it based on how much PFAS they believed would be going in to create the hydrogen fluoride, and based on hydrogen fluoride testing of the stacks back in 2018. And then we also put a pretty conservative estimate on what EPA had told us for possible PFAS that were there that weren't being quantified by the regular method. And at that time, they were about 80% of the ambient air limits that the state has established based on scientific studies and whatnot, hydrogen fluoride. In 2021, they did a material balance that was based off from the consent decree requirements, where they had to analyze their raw materials for PFAS compounds and do an analysis as if all of that PFAS got converted to hydrogen fluoride. Again, those emission levels were even lower than the overestimate that I believe was done for the 2020 evaluation, and they were well below the ambient air limits. And then this year, or September of last year, when they did the stack test, they actually measured hydrogen fluoride using an EPA-approved method coming out of the stack. And again, those emissions were significantly low enough to not trigger the requirements under our air toxics rule. The permit requires an annual stack test to verify PFAS, but also hydrogen fluoride. So every time that they do a stack test, they would then evaluate this. But again, if the emissions are, at these low levels, they would not trigger.
Any other? Okay. Any other, Ms. Mesmer? Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? No.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm having some technical difficulties with my system. Thanks for that update, Ms. Beahm. I have a couple of questions, and first of all, I didn't hear how many PFAS are being detected of the 50. I can't remember. I thought there was, I can't remember, but what you said or if you said it. But and the fact that HF is being produced and the fact that there are PFAS being produced means there's not complete destruction of the PFAS by the RTO, which is a concern. And I think Ms. Allen, that's the concern she was speaking to. I wondered why the industry is so reluctant to put an HF scrubber on, because HF is a really corrosive acid, material, and I would think to preserve the lifetime of that equipment, that would be something they would want to do since it's so expensive. And I wondered if there are any ongoing inspections about whether or not corrosion is happening, and wondered also if there are any other investigations about unintended consequences, some unintended plasmas or any other possibly dangerous byproducts being formed since it's not being completely destroyed. In light of the fact that, this past week, the Pentagon halted any incineration of AFFF because of this issue. Technically, we don't know how to completely destroy the PFAS compounds. And we know that Saint-Gobain uses not just these 4 PFAS compounds that are currently regulated in New Hampshire, but, a ton more. So just wondering about those questions. I also wondered when the bypass is being used and if DES is monitoring, what's the appropriate circumstances under which those bypass is being used, and if that is possibly contributing to some of the rainwater issues that we're seeing. So those are kind of the big questions I have on what you talked about.
Thank you for your questions. See if I can remember them. So the stack test method requires analysis of 50 PFAS compounds. I don't have the stack test right in front of me. Some were not detected at all, which means that they're not there, at least at detection levels, right? I don't know the number of how many were detected off the top of my head. What I can say is that the RTO is converting what PFAS compounds are there to hydrogen fluoride, and the method for testing for hydrogen fluoride is a well-established method. So if hydrogen fluoride is being created, the method's going to detect it. We did have additional samples taken in September that are at EPA. We're awaiting any kind of results from that. It's not going to be quantitative. It's simply going to be, did we or did we not, EPA, did they or did they not see any PFAS in their samples that were different. But in terms of the 50 compounds that they did evaluate at Saint-Gobain, the levels are very low coming in and coming out of the control device. In fact, for the hydrogen fluoride test, using a well-established method and using a well-established air dispersion model that we've been using for many years and has been, constantly updated, they're 2 orders of magnitude below any ambient air standards. So I'm not sure I quite understand your question. If you think there should be more hydrogen fluoride coming out than is being detected, but I don't quite see it that same way. When you asked,
No, I was just saying any hydrogen fluoride could corrode the equipment.
right. So they do have a maintenance part of their monitoring plan in terms of daily, weekly, monthly, annual inspections required by the installer of the RTO. And then they also have a maintenance plan in terms of the duct work, looking at that the town of Merrimack's fire department had mandated for them. So all of that is part of their monitoring plan, all the records of what they've done for maintenance on the device and monitoring and inspections of the duct work, inspections of the RTO based on its operation, based on vendor requirements. That's all being documented. I don't remember seeing anything about corrosion, but I will go back and take a look at that.
So anything about my question about the bypass and when it's being used? And just a follow up to that, since what you just said. So the company is aware, and that stack testing is only done in certain instances, right? It's not real time stack monitoring, or it's just done on a periodic basis when the company is aware that it's going to be done?
Well, the stack test is done on an annual basis. We evaluated what raw materials they would be using, looked at the raw material information to make sure they were using highly, the compounds that had the raw materials that had the most PFAS compounds in them. The products that they were making would ensure that they had the most emissions. It really was a maximum condition situation with all of these towers running. So I feel as though the stack test is actually, well, it complies with our requirements to do it at 90% of your capacity at the facility and to make sure that it's worst case. That being said, there are no continuous monitors for PFAS. There's really not even an EPA certified method for stack testing. We're using an other test method 45. It's just how, sciences and regulations have progressed. But I feel very confident, the department feels very confident. We've approved the stack test. It was done in September. They'll be required to do another one. Technically by October, probably will be done sooner than that. In terms of the bypass operation, they use that bypass for emergency purposes. It's detailed in the monitoring plan. I don't really want to go into too much detail about it. Again, we have that enforcement case going on, but it's used primarily, or it's only used when there is a requirement for that RTO to shut down, or that it has shut down from some sort of operational condition, such as a high temperature that would destroy the RTO. So there's certain conditions that are considered emergency that RTOs are typically shut down for, and the bypass is designed for that. Their application, which is all public information, they're requesting the operation of that bypass for about 175 hours a year. We're evaluating whether that would cause or contribute to any groundwater problem from that stack. So that's what the intent of the permit review is to look at that. And in terms of the rainwater, I can say that the bypass stack was in operation in August when the rainwater on site detected some PFAS compounds, but it was not in operation in March during the more recent results that Maureen mentioned about PFAS in Merrimack. But it was also measured in Concord and Nashua in March.
So can I just ask another follow-up? Is it typical to need 175 hours of emergency bypass use for this? Is it typical that that system would require emergency diversion for that long a time during a year?
I don't want to speculate on what other RTOs in the state have used. I don't have that knowledge off the top of my head. I can say that this is a new device going through startup, shakedown process of making sure things are working. They have, if you look at the records, a lot of different parts that they've either replaced or found to to cause the problem with them shutting down more frequently when they first started up. That's not unheard of, to have a period of startup that requires some shakedown process. The amount of bypass has decreased. When we asked for the April information, it was less operation than it had been when it first started up. I think we're going in the right direction, but I can't tell you whether 175 is typical or not.
So it's somewhat continuously being used though on a monthly basis. Not continuously, but there is continued monthly use of that bypass right now.
There have been some minutes of bypass in the last few months. I can't tell you.
That's in the monitoring reports you said that are on One Stop.
Well, yeah, actually, I was looking at it this morning and I had uploaded information when the LOD was issued and they responded in January. When we went out and did the inspection, I don't believe I uploaded everything that we got after that. I will have to go back and take care of that in the next couple of days. So I can send all of that in the summary with Mr. Wimsett's summary.
Okay. Any other questions for Beahm? I have a couple. Ms. Beahm, when you were talking about the mass balance, that's on total fluorine. So total fluorine going in, that's among those 50 PFAS compounds, and then going out, it would be total fluorine, which would be HF plus, I forget how many pounds you said of PFAS that are escaping the RTO.
Well, mind if I correct you for a minute?
Okay.
So the material balance was designed to have them analyze their raw materials and then assume that anything that was in there that was fluorinated would come out as hydrogen fluoride. They were supposed to either use a total organic fluoride test if it was commercially and readily available, which it is not for this type of matricity, or to look at PFAS compounds that are readily available and can be measured. And so they didn't choose, they had no other method, and they analyzed it for PFAS compounds in the raw materials. And that material balance really supports the results we saw during the stack test. The stack test showed about 17 pounds per year of 50 PFAS coming into the RTO and 2 pounds per year out. And when I say 2, I mean, we're talking 0.001 for PFOA or PFOS or whatnot. I mean, they're very, very minute amounts for the individual ones. It just happens to add up to 2. As Lorene pointed out, some of them are the shorter chain.
Mhm.
That's more.
Okay. So the material balance was based on predicting from their raw materials and their process what would be going into the RTO. But we don't, is there an ability to test exactly what is going into the RTO, or is it a calculation based on their process and their raw materials?
The material balance was a calculation, what was going to go in, and then assuming it all converted to hydrogen fluoride coming out. The stack test was measuring PFAS coming in and measuring PFAS coming out.
Oh, okay. All right. And then I have another question. I mean, one of the issues in Merrimack is PFBA and that it's breaking through the filters. Has Dr. Vitale been following up on any toxicology or health studies done on PFBA? I mean, do you happen to know where the science is on that? Because it seems as though that the use of that is, I'm kind of assuming from everything that's been said is that there is a higher rate or higher use of PFBA in the process, or at least as a byproduct. And I'm just wondering if that is a PFAS that needs to be looked at for further regulation. But I don't know of any documented health studies that would drive an MCL for PFBA. I guess I'm wondering, I mean, where's the science on that? Are you aware?
I don't know, Mike, do you know anything about that? I have not been keeping up with water standards.
Yeah, I'm not, I know that I don't know specifically, and I can certainly check with John and have him report back. I know that as a general rule, the smaller chain PFAS tend to, when we do have information about their potential health effects, endpoints, and the way that they are, accumulated in the body, they tend to end up being considered, to the extent that we have information, to have very much higher recommended drinking water standards, or just because of the fact that they don't accumulate as much in the body, and because of their specific health endpoints. But with respect to PFBA specifically, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm certainly happy to check in with John and report back about that, about what we know.
And Mr. Wimsatt, when you do have that conversation with him, if there has been, a lot of advancement in the understanding of the health impacts, if he wants to get on a future agenda to update us on that, that would be great.
Sure.
And then one more question, Ms. Beahm. Have you done a top analysis on the rainwater?
A what analysis?
Just a top analysis?
So all of the analyses that have been done so far have been conducted by Eurofins for Saint-Gobain as part of their consent decree. So no, there has not been a cost analysis.
Okay. All right. Anybody else before we move on? All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Beahm. Thank you, Mr. Wimsatt, for your report. I got a call this morning from Abby Rogers, who intended to report on behalf of Dr. Bush, who's away. And unfortunately, she and her family are sick with COVID. So she actually forwarded me her report, and I'm just going to read it, and then I'll forward it to the commission and to Ms. Murphy for the minutes. But I want to read it just because this is a public meeting. So as far as PFAS outreach education initiatives, DHHS launched an updated website on May 3rd. The new website includes a dedicated page for PFAS with resources from both state and federal partners such as NHDES and ATSDR. And then the Nurse Practitioner Conference on April 8th. DES EHP connected with Peg DiTullio about supporting her efforts to educate nurse practitioners about PFAS. DPHS partners and community members were invited to participate in planning and conducting the presentation. The agencies will continue to work with stakeholders to advance provider understanding of matters relating to environmental health, I guess. Merrimack Cancer Investigation. DHHS continues to convene the Cancer Concern Review Team to look at cancer data more closely to determine the focus for next steps in the investigation into the excess of kidney cancer observed in Merrimack. The review team has completed the assessment phase of the investigation and is currently preparing a report summarizing the department's data analysis and recommendations for next steps, including the feasibility of conducting an epidemiological study. The department anticipates the report to be finalized by the end of May and will provide an update or share the report if it is complete at the next commission meeting. So that was Dr. Bush's update. If you have any questions, don't ask me because I just read it, but if you can hold those, either to send them individually to Dr. Bush or hold them for the next meeting. Okay, subcommittee reports. Are there any subcommittee reports?
Yes.
Yes, Mr.
Chris Bandasi. We had a environmental subcommittee meeting last Friday, and I have to apologize to Ms. Mesmer because I thought she was no longer on the committee, but we will make sure she's involved in future meetings. We looked at several things. One area that probably Joe or Mike could speak more knowledgeably to is the status of the soil study that is ongoing. But part of that, or that's in progress, is to look at the statewide background levels from different sites, and that's still undergoing work. But as we look forward to the last biennium during which this commission will be in existence, I think that's going to be very useful in terms of future legislation that might be needed. And one of the sites that is being studied is one with biosolids. I can't recall whether it's on the site or near the site, but I think that will give us some very good information. And it segued into one of our objectives this year is to begin looking at agricultural products and sort of compounding ground contamination, groundwater contamination of products that are brought onto site. And obviously that caused some significant issues in Maine. Anecdotally, I can say that people are still concerned about home gardening, perhaps in ways that can be addressed, whether it's by the Department of Agriculture or the County Extension Service. Certainly there are areas that should be avoided, but there are also common ways that people in areas of contamination deal with it, either by raised beds or water barrels, or there are known ways that home gardeners can avoid problems. And we're now entering our 6th growing season since we were aware of the St. Gobain contamination, and I think homeowners and home gardeners can be given some guidance. Obviously those stakeholders are not part of this commission, but we ought to be looking to other agencies to bring that work at least to some kind of public attention. Mike had mentioned that the NEMOA presentations are available online. So that's potentially a huge area of study. Personally, looking for the information, there may be a difference between what a member and a non-member can access. So I wasn't successful post-meeting, but I will try again. Maybe it was too soon. But I would definitely recommend that we all take a look at that information. And then lastly, I had mentioned and said I would follow up on a homeowner who did a private test, which I knew was positive, that I didn't see on the GIS map. The Goldner bi-monthly reports do have a list of data from other sources. They're identified as data from other sources. So I know that at least some private testing companies are reporting the information. That actually happened to be a site that was reported. It just wasn't on the GIS map. And so I sort of plowed through that data, and there were a couple of other data from other sources that were not on the map, but it was very low number of the 51 that I looked at. A large number of people from Londonderry comprise the data from other sources contributors. That's sort of logical historically, since they're looking at it more recently, but it's all within the GMZ. And there's a fairly high correlation between data reported from other sources and adjacent properties not having had tests done. And I'm not quite sure why the reason is. It's a correlation. I can't say that there's a causal relationship. Certainly there are other properties in proximity to those properties which might also prompt another test. But I think that's filling in those gaps as we go forward is very important for monitoring, as well as to get a complete picture of where we have groundwater contamination. And I guess lastly, what I would say, not specifically addressed at that meeting, but on the subject of resampling, a number of people, I think 3, at that May 4th informational session talked about their resampling results. They were all going up, which was interesting, and that's concerning as well. And it may be a self-selected population who were concerned enough to stay online and ask questions, but there's definitely a need for getting a thorough data set to make sure, among other things, that we do resampling where it's needed. So that is it for my update.
Thank you, Mr. Badazian. Are there any questions from the members? Okay, did the health subcommittee meet this past month? No? Okay. Um, did the communications committee meet? Don't think, oh, they
Yes.
did?
We met
Oh.
on April 29th, and I'll keep it really brief because communications kind of speaks for itself. So Nancy Murphy, Ron Dunn, and myself were in attendance at that meeting. If anyone has any contact with the commission representative from Litchfield, I think her name is April Weber. I have never met her, spoken to her. I reached out in the emails and things to try to engage her because we really want all citizen reps to be part of this and have not had any success. I don't think she's been active, so that's disappointing. We do have someone from Bedford who my understanding is he's been nominated and is in the pipeline for the official approval, which I don't see a problem with. So on 5/27, I hope that he can join us. So basically, we kind of revamped what the history is of the subcommittee because that wasn't something I was involved in the past. We looked at the needs and the role basically of filling gaps between public and the official, business that's being done. We reviewed town to town, what's going out there for information, talked about making sure each town has, liaisons and citizen contacts so people can get the right information, and integrating the new launched website and the great stuff that's being done to really scrutinize how that can be out there to the public and how people can have an ongoing presence from their communities of who to reach, in the state for what concerns. And so that was our general sense, really, to really scrutinize, can communication and visibility be better from community to state, and how can we do that? So that's our general report. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Miss Allen. Any questions for Miss Allen? And I'll follow up. I know Representative Dolan, LaSalle's, and Bohm haven't been attending. I don't know if they want to continue on, but I'll, when you mention that, I need to follow up with them. Thank you. I did invite Mr. Strand, Michael Strand. I haven't heard from the Senate president yet, but I think, Senator Daniels made the nomination and followed up getting some contact information from Mr. Strand. So I did invite him to participate, but he hasn't joined. But I did have a nice conversation with him. He is eager to participate. Okay, I just want to, on the subject of subcommittees, I just want to give all the subcommittees a heads up that in June and July, I'd like you to consider any legislative, even non-legislative action that you're recommending, because on our August meeting, I want to have a discussion about what that's going to be. I know incumbent reps who are seeking re-election can submit LSRs in September, and I would like us to reach a consensus about what legislation, if any, we want to propose to be filed in September, at least to kind of get the ball rolling. We also, that will also be a foundation for our annual report, which is due November 1st to the governor. So I don't want to wait until the last minute. I want to give the communications committee and the policy committee September and October to work on that final report, at least get kind of an outline in September. So in order to do that, we are going to need to start the discussion about legislative and non-legislative actions in August. So if the subcommittee chairs can take note of that, schedule meetings appropriately, and then be ready at that August meeting to submit your recommendations. And then the policy committee will then convene either after that August meeting to define what recommendations we want to make for this year, and we'll probably use after the August meeting in September to do that, so that we can at least have those recommendations September or October. I don't know what they're going to look like. We're going to look to the subcommittees for some guidance on that. Just some quick thoughts this is just coming from me. Some of my concerns are, I go past the Saint-Gobain almost every day, and I get really worried looking at all of the clearing that they've done and where those trees have gone. And I'm assuming those trees do contain some PFAS. So one of the things I wanted to look at is, and it may need legislative action, is to have some rules or guidance or legislation that controls the removal or dictates the removal of materials from a site that has soil contamination, groundwater contamination of PFAS. Because if that material has PFAS, and I think we do it for soil anyway, we don't want to cart it off to contaminate some other site. You know, we want to contain the PFAS to where the contamination, we don't want it to spread. So just the fact that all those trees have been taken away, I really have concern about that it's also taking PFAS to some other site. I also want to have some discussion. I don't think this would fall into either the environmental or health subcommittee, but maybe Mr. Wimsatt could kind of let this marinate in his brain, is a retroactive rebate from the time that the consent decree was issued or even when the contamination was identified by DES. A lot of people went out and got poets at that time, and I think they got those as a result of the contamination. And I think that, I don't know if they are, but they should be eligible to get that investment refunded as people that are just getting poets now. I think they shouldn't have to absorb that cost because they acted early to protect their families. So that, yes, Mr. Wimsatt?
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess there's an echo here. I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah.
Let me try. There, is that better?
Yeah.
Well, sorry about the echo. So the rebate program that we're looking to stand up, that was approved by the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund Advisory Commission, does provide for a retroactive date back to September of 2019, which is when we set the current standards for under rule. Of course, it was eventually appealed and then it got delayed for a while, but our first rulemaking became effective September of 19. And right now the program has been improved for reimbursement of rebates for any systems that were put in after that September of 2019 date. And I do want to mention, just while we're on it, is that we did go back to the Trust Fund Advisory Commission to get an additional approval, which we just got this past Monday at the Advisory Commission's monthly meeting, for a rebate value. Originally, it was requested at $1,500, which likely would cover the cost of a POU system for anyone, even if it was installed by a vendor. But we reconsidered that and we went back and we've gotten approval to implement the rebate program for up to $5,000 for anybody who wants to put in either a POU or a POET system. And then up to, and to the extent, this will be a smaller number of people who are eligible for this because of where they're located, but to the extent that you are near a water line and you wish to spend instead the money to connect to the water line as opposed to putting in a treatment system, you would be eligible for up to $10,000 reimbursement of costs associated with connecting to a water line. And you know, I will mention that the amendment that Representative Mooney described, House Bill 1547, that made the $25 million appropriation of general fund surplus funds to our PFAS grant program. That amendment also included, as Representative Mooney described, it gave authority to DES to establish rebate programs. And so what we're looking to do is establish a rebate program under that authority. If that passes, it still hasn't passed, but if it passes and it's signed by the governor, we would look to establish this rebate program in concert with the $5 million in funding that we got from the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund Advisory Commission, to combine that with additional funds from this $25 million to make sure that we have enough resources to provide these rebates to anybody who hasn't been offered an alternate water source by a responsible party. So that's, and again, as was described earlier. So I just wanted to share that. I also wanted to go back to Chris's mention of the NUMOA website and the NUMOA PFAS Science Conference materials. I feel your pain, Chris. I struggled that the first time I tried to go and look at that, I had a hard time with it. I think I have it figured out, and what I will do is, unfortunately, it's not a couple of clicks, it's about 5 clicks, but I will describe that. I'll put a link in my notes for this meeting along with the description about how you get to it, to what you're looking for, and hopefully that will help people who haven't been successful in getting there to get there, because there are, I don't think every single presentation is on there, but the slides for the lion's share of them are there. I suspect it's probably 80 presentations that are on there. So I'll put some information in my notes about how to access that. And if anybody really struggles with it and wants to call me, we can go online together and I'll walk you through it.
Okay, thank you. Just a second, Ms. Murphy. The other 2 things that have been on my mind that I want to share with the commission is one of the things I want us to consider is as an action is to and this was probably going to need legislation to approve appropriation of monies, and it's going to need discussion with Dr. Bush, is to expand a health study. I know they've done the cancer study, but I'd like an expansion to look at non-cancer diseases and defects associated with PFAS that, just to analyze their prevalence in the consent decree towns. And then also associated with that is an expanded blood testing program. To my knowledge, the blood testing program that was done was very limited. It was only in Merrimack, and I think it may give us some good information to expand that. So those are things I'll talk to Dr. Bush about, but those have been things on my mind. And like the rebate program, they may already be working on this. So, but those are things of concern. And then one other thing I want to mention is that Ms. Murphy and I don't know if Mr. Allen is either, we will be attending the PFAS conference in Wilmington, North Carolina. That's going to be from Tuesday, June 14th, and we'll return on the 17th. So I'm sure we'll have some things we can share from that conference. Ms. Murphy, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to actually comment on, you raised the suggestion for rebates for those residents who put in a point of entry treatment for their homes upon first discovery of this. And I was just going to say that a lot of the people that did that, including myself, we were on public water. So even though the grants right now are for private well owners, we knew our public water system and our wells were contaminated. So many of those people that actually put in point of entry treatment way back over the last 6 years were actually public water users as well. And that, from my understanding of all the grants, that's not part of these grants are for private well owners. Is that right, Mike? It's just private wells, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So just wanted to say this. There's been 2 huge groups of people that have done it, and unfortunately only one group is. And I'm glad. I mean, we certainly need it, and we've taken action ourselves in terms of private public wells here in Merrimack, but there were a lot of people that are impacted as well that are on public water. So just I know it. Just wanted to comment. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments any member wants to make before we? A couple of things. One, I see our next meeting will be June 10th at 10 a.m. So if you can add that to your calendar. And then I know we've had public comments. We added that when we were meeting in person. And it kind of isn't really practical having it as part of this webinar. I think it's kind of a burden for the public to participate this way. So what I'd like to do is keep this as a standing agenda item but have it be an opportunity for those of us in our communities to bring forth concerns we've had. So if there is a member of the public who contacts you about something, a question, would be a good time to share that concern. Does that sound okay for everybody? Okay, great. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved by, Mr. Wimsatt, are you motioning to
Well,
adjourn?
I'm happy to make that motion, but before we act on it, I wanted to ask, I do have a conflict that I cannot resolve between 10 and noon on the 10th of June on Friday. So two solutions I could propose: to have someone fill in for me from the agency, or if we could start at 9, I could provide my update and field any questions between, before 10 o'clock.
Okay. How about moving to 9? Does that work for everybody? We start at 9? All right. I see a lot of heads nodding. That sounds great. Thank you, Mr. Wimsatt, for offering to meet earlier.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then I assume you're going to go forth with the motion to adjourn. So
Absolutely.
we'll take that. Is there a
Second.
second? Ms. Murphy, seconds, all in favor, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye. And thank you, Amy.